from the end of the room, so I can never tell what time it is. So
Where they move it, where's
I
it?
know, but I don't like to look down at my phone. I like to see a clock on the wall.
There was a
But
clock there before?
yeah, yeah,
It's
where
down
that
and
mirror
around
is.
now.
Yeah.
Where's it?
It
Oh.
was where that mirror is.
Yeah. At any rate, let's start with Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Welcome to the workshop meeting for October 24th. And I want to know whether, did anybody sign up for public comment? I don't see anybody in the room, but okay. So we'll move right into the presentation on the Board of Education Health Insurance Program from Lockton Companies. And we have a representative from Lockton here with us today. And sir, if you wouldn't mind coming up to the mic. And I'm sorry, we probably should have warned you that we were going to probably get you on right away.
That's okay.
And if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself for us and for the members of the public and explaining who Lockton is and what you do for the town, because people watching may what you do for the Board of Ed and the town, because people may not know.
Okay, sure. My name is Todd Goodall. Work for Lockton Companies. We're a benefits consulting firm that's been working with the Windham Board and Town of Education for, I guess, about 10 years now. I've been working directly with them for probably 5 or 6 myself. We provide services from negotiations to budgeting to day-to-day issues with claims, compliance, all of the things, ACA reporting, all that fun stuff you may have heard or read about at some point in time. That's kind of where our job kind of falls. So soup to nuts, we do quite a few things. Help from a budgeting standpoint. I guess that kind of covers everything in a nutshell. That's kind of a high-level view of what I do.
Thank you. So we've asked you here today because years back we embarked upon being a self-insured entity for the health insurance for the town and Board of Ed employees, and it's a big ticket item in our budget and something that affects the personnel of the Board of Ed pretty intimately with themselves and their families. And so what we wanted to do was hear a report from you today and give board members a chance to ask questions and get into some discussion if they would like based on the report. I should let you know that we have a couple of fairly recent new board members, so this is new information for many people sitting at the table tonight.
Okay. From a report standpoint, I understand there's a series of questions that folks kind of had. I didn't know if there was something I was supposed to present from materials. There's some specific questions I know I was prepared to answer. Is there a report you're expecting for me to be handing out to folks?
Why don't you start with the questions that we sent to you?
Okay.
Before the executive committee met last week and talked about questions for Lockton, and we also, a couple of other people sent questions along too. So why don't you just start working through those questions first?
Okay.
Thanks.
Sure. I guess let me make sure I pull those up real quick. So I had those.
You can take a moment. Don't worry.
Yeah, there were some separate ones that I had.
Pardon? No. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
We'll give it to him.
No, we're good. Thank you. I hadn't had it printed out. I just had it on my email. I was trying to find it. Thank you for providing that. I appreciate it. All right, so I go right down the list of questions that you do have. Estimates on spending for this year and for next year. And just to clarify, when you say this year, meaning the current year we're in now or the 17-18 year that just passed?
I think we mean the current year and then the upcoming year.
Okay. All right, so from an estimated projection this year, we're estimating probably about, I think it was about a 10%. Well, we haven't done budget for 1920 yet. That's the piece we're working on now. But for 1819, we're about 3 months into the year so far this year, and the projection for the upcoming year was, I believe, about a 5 or 6% increase over current costs.
Which was, what, a little over $12 million?
Correct. The total spend when you factor in all the benefits was a little over $12 million. Correct.
For this year.
For the upcoming year, that's correct.
And we budgeted on 5 to 6%, you're
Correct.
saying.
Which would be something on the order of $600,000. Now, that's for the board and the town. That's the whole health insurance package, correct?
That is correct.
Can you break it down by the Board of Ed?
In front of me, I don't have that actual split with me.
Typically, it was 17 for the town and the reciprocal for 83% for the board.
Yeah, based on historical split, yeah, it's about 17% would be town expenditures, and 83% of that 600,000 would be Board of Education related. Yeah, that's correct.
So that's roughly $10 million for the board.
And $2 million for the town.
83% is roughly 5.6. It's about $10 million for the board and $2 million for the town.
Roughly, correct. Yep. Obviously, with being self-insured, that can vary year over year, but that's from a budgeting standpoint. That's correct.
I'm not sure that everybody on the board, and I'm sure most of the public doesn't really understand what self-insured actually means, because there is an insurance policy there. So maybe you could just give a little rough explanation of how self-insurance actually works.
Sure. Okay. I'll try to keep it brief. So
In plain language.
Yes.
No acronyms.
I will do my best.
Okay, thanks.
From a fully insured perspective, I'll start there. When you're fully insured, you're charged a premium rate for each individual. So we have a single person, a two-person, and a family group. Each of those has separate rates. That's a fully insured arrangement. And each month you would get a bill that you'd pay for that each month on a fully insured arrangement. Under self-insurance, we set the rates up similarly, but the way that things are funded are far different. In a self-insured arrangement, there's what they call administrative fees. There's a stop-loss premium. So there is a premium portion that's part of those fees, and that's part of that's to protect you against any large claims that go over $175,000. That's a stop-loss pooling point that exists on this town and board right now.
Maybe you should back up a bit and say that when you're self-insured, you're paying the cost of the health care directly.
You are.
Yes, we're not like the insurance company doesn't get a bill and then they pay the
the
bill.
Correct. I was talking about the fixed piece first, but you're right. The fixed expenses are going to pay every month regardless, so it's head count times those fixed costs. But the variable is exactly the claims. So there's a bank account that's set up, and when claims are incurred and paid, those funds are pulled from the Board of Ed in town to pay for those claims. That's the difference between fully insured and self-insured. You're paying for actual claim dollars versus just a premium value each month. That's the big difference. And that's where you'll see some variation. Some months are going to be good, and some months may be a little more expensive than you expected. So we have a budget that we plan, and we have a number that we'd like to see each month, but you will see some swings from month to month because you're self-insured.
And there actually is an insurance policy for it's essentially a stop-loss policy. As you said,
correct.
If the claims go too high, there is an insurance policy that covers
that excess.
You're correct. There's actually two insurance policies that exist within that. There's what they call individual stop-loss, and there's called aggregate stop-loss. An individual stop-loss is really what it says, is for any individual that has claims exceeding $175,000 within the policy period. That's from 7/1 through 6/30. Any claims that go above that will be covered by Anthem, who's your insurance carrier. They have and you pay a premium for that. So you're responsible for the first 175, and then anything above that is covered by the insurance company. Now for aggregate stop loss, and this is, I kind of call this sleep insurance, but it's important to have just in case you have a really, really crazy bad year where you have a lot of claims that maybe don't go to 175,000, but are higher in frequency and cost. And what that does, and that's 120% of expected claims. I'm trying not to go into details. I apologize. So if you had a really bad year as a group and you went above 120% of your expected claims, then that insurance would kick in as well. I've been doing this almost 30 years, and it's only happened twice. So it's good to have. It's inexpensive insurance, but you have that coverage as well, town and board.
At the last meeting, at the Budget and Finance 4, Chris said that we went over what we've previously spent from year to year, but not 120%. No, in our luck, we went 119% over.
There was a large bump between 16, 17, and 17, 18. I think it relates to some higher cost months. We had our highest cost month was like 1.3 million, and it got down to 825,000 one month. But typically, we had some really big months, especially in July. I think when a lot of teachers, is this thing working? When there's a lot of teachers on vacation, they opt to get their procedures done at that point. So we have a $1.3 million month in July. We had another $1.3 million in August. So that was, we've had some higher cost months this year than in previous years. So we were fairly level for 3 years, but this past year we saw some abnormally high claims, and we're still trying to reconcile that. Figure out exactly why.
But not at 120%.
No.
I don't believe, no, not at 120%.
Definitely
No.
Chris, why don't you move up to the table, because that mic is clearly not working. Thanks.
It's not happy.
You have two, Trace, you can have here or there. We can have.
So Tracy, did you have another question along those lines?
No,
that
I
you-
can see why the numbers would go up in August and July, because teachers aren't in school, so if they're going to have something done,
They'll get it done
that's
in
the best
summer.
time to do it without missing work.
Right.
And two, their deductibles start again September 1st.
Correct.
My husband's start in January, so I've told the kids already, if you're going to get sick, do it before January 1st, because then we've got to pay for it. So I understand how that works. That's the best time to get it done, when it doesn't interrupt their teaching schedule and before they hit their deductible again.
And another big piece that hit this year was the full impact of funding HSAs, which was about, what did we figure?
No acronyms.
Health savings
the
account.
health savings
Savings
account. We seed the money 50% upfront, or in 2 pieces, and sometimes 4 pieces, based on the contract language. That was something that's paid out of the general fund. It's not paid out of this health benefits fund, but still, it's all this incremental spending that we hope is going to be offset by reduced claims. So, because for the first series of claims, you have to get up past either, you have to fund 2,000, of which we give you 1,000. If you're family, we give you 2,000, but you have to cover the rest up to 4,000. And we hope that that's having an impact on our claims numbers. So we're going to look into if that's actually happening too, to verify, because I see all this money going out, but I can't really see, is it impacting favorably our claims?
Right, and to give some background on that, that's most of those folks are the teachers that they went in, their new contract went into place last year with regards to the HSA and HRA plans. So you're right, there's some data available. I think we're going to monitor that as we go forward to see, okay, are we really getting those savings we expected by moving to these type of plans? So I could do the analysis now, but I don't have enough data to what I would consider credible information.
When will you be able to give us a fair analysis?
I think if I get another year's worth of information, I want to make sure I have a fair amount of data. There's about 300 folks enrolled on high deductible plans now between the board and town, the majority of those being the teachers on the board side. So that'll be a better sampling of information to kind of see how that compares to how the standard PPO plans that are also in place are running versus the high deductible plans.
I'm very interested in the high deductible plans. I mean, I do health reform for a living, so I understand this issue pretty well.
Yep.
And the latest data shows that people in high deductible plans actually make bad health decisions, and they end up costing more over the long run because of deferred care.
There are some folks that and I don't think it's in the majority. That's my opinion. Again, you do some health reform work yourself, so I don't want to question.
Oh, it's an independent report. There's a lot of literature on this nationwide. So I am very interested in hearing whether these high deductible plans are really getting us the results that we need, or else are they a detriment to the morale and the satisfaction of our staff.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly put some analysis together for you to show how Windham's running, and even in the industry as a whole. Because, the group your size, it's well, you want to know what it is from a credibility standpoint. You want to get as many numbers as you can to kind of support whether it is good or not. I agree with you there.
Okay.
Okay.
Mark?
Yeah. Well, one of the main interests I have in this is 1.3 million in July, 1.3 million in August, and we're discussing the fact that there might be a hole in the budget we need to cover. But it seems to me if we're at 1.3, something's got to be 175,000. Who's tracking the individual claims so that we can know if we're kicking in the stop loss policy or not? I can't imagine we came up with 2.6 in 2 months with $5,000 claims.
No, there was claim activity above 175. Trust me, we do see that information on a monthly basis. So there were 4 individuals that exceeded the 175,000 point in the 2017 and 2018 policy period.
So when do we get that money to cover the expenses that, Chris, you had mentioned earlier, last month or 2 weeks ago that we needed to cover?
Well, the way the program is set up is so once you hit that 175,000, Anthem has a program in place where it automatically stops pulling money from your account and just automatically will fund those claims above that $175,000 amount. So there's not a lag period where you got to pay all the money out and then wait for it to come back from an insurance carrier. Anthem's is integrated, so that stop loss policy, once you hit that number, it stops pulling money from your bank account. So you don't need to wait for the funds.
So how does that reconcile, Chris, with your saying we were short some money that we need to fill a gap?
Well, I'm just saying we can never budget sufficiently, and we've tried to increase in this past year's budget. In 18-19, we were able to put some extra money aside for benefits. Typically, I tried to hold it at 27.5% of salaries, but that over the years has not been quite sufficient to keep our reserve levels to where we need to go. So this year we went up to 30% to increase both the employer and the employee portion of the well, the employee portion comes out of the premium that we charge them, and that is a withholding. That money goes onto the balance sheet, and then we transfer it over into the fund. And then there's the piece that's the town's contribution, which is in that percent, that also goes on over. And then we also are able to charge some of our grants that we have that have salaried people a benefit, their actual benefit percentages, and that also becomes revenue in that fund. So there's really 3 or 4 different types of revenues. There's the employer's contribution, which is just a quarterly transfer. There's the employee's withholding out of his paycheck that we transfer over. And then there's charges to the grants, which fluctuate, of course, because grants go up and down, and the amount of personnel that we can charge in fluctuates. But we try to charge in the exact cost of their benefits and then move that money over into this fund as well. So the revenue piece of it is fairly complicated, but that piece can fluctuate around from year to year.
But you're talking about a reserve of 30%?
No.
Now, what are you saying then?
We've been trying to target 10 to 15, and we had been like over 15 at one point. Right now, we're down to 5, and we're trying to build that back up again through 3 or 4 different strategies. And we'll know in December because our books close in December, so we'll know where we're at with the reserves at that point for the town and the board. But we're trying to target to get back to 10 to 15, which is what we feel is a healthy reserve, which
It's not a question of what's healthy. It's an actuarial calculation. You know what it needs to be.
Yep.
And it needs to be more than 15 most of the time. That's one of the questions that he's got a list of questions there, but one of the questions is, okay, so what have been the fluctuations over time? Because, yes, some years, and I mean, everybody worries about what happens when the expenses exceed what you estimated. But for every year that you go over, there's probably a year that you went under. And so it goes up and down. So the down years should save enough money to help you pay for the up years. And so the question is, what's our history been?
Right, well, I mean, and I don't do the actual calculations for the reserve balances. There's some internal things that are done there.
I know.
But I know from a projection standpoint, we took a look at some history, which is part of one of the questions that was asked of me. And when we looked at kind of projected claims versus actuals, I kind of, calculated it over 4 years, and you were up about $600,000 to the plus from a projection standpoint. So there's more components that go into that from what needs to be funded. So, but it's been pretty good over the last 4 years. But you're right, we do want to build some conservatism into our projections to help replenish that fund you're talking about.
So when you say 600, you mean over the last 4 years, our actual expenses have been $600,000 less than the total of what was estimated?
For the health insurance claims that I reviewed when the projection we did versus what the actual claims came in, that's correct.
Okay. So, in fact, if we've been putting 10% into the reserve every year, which is roughly for the Board of Ed about $1 million, we should have put in, over the last 4 years, we should have been put in $4 million into the reserve fund. We should have picked up an extra $600,000 in savings over estimates. So we should be, what?
5%.
We should have a reserve of somewhere around 4.6 million. And yet we have a reserve that's 5% or 600,000.
And like I said,
So what that says is that we haven't in fact been putting the amount of money. When this plan was set up originally, the idea is that we would budget the estimated expense and 10% for reserve, unless the reserve fund hit 25%, at which point
We'd stop putting money in.
you don't have to keep throwing more money in, because at
Correct.
25% you've essentially put yourself in a situation where you're really unlikely to spend it down all the way down. If it goes below 25%, you build it back up to 25%.
Correct.
But what you're saying is, what I'm hearing is that we haven't actually done that.
There again, there's other components. I don't do the actual calculation of the reserve piece itself. There's a lot of pieces that go into that are on the Christian does. So I'm looking at from a medical standpoint, which is the biggest portion of kind of the budget we support and help them with. But that's kind of the results I've seen based on projections, my projections versus actual claim activity. So we are still going to work to try to work very close with them to try to build that reserve back up. We know it's got to be back up again, but we'll do everything we can to help them out for that.
But I think what we want to signal, though, is that we're going to be going into our budget setting process this, after the new year, and we're going to need some real numbers. We're not going to want to have guesses at this. We're going to need some real, from Chris and from you all working together. We're going to need some real concrete projections of what we need to do.
Agreed.
And if we have to do it gradually, then we need to have a plan for how we're going to do it.
Can I just add that, because I heard Chris say that it was a build up of a year, but I do want the board to know that you can't build 15% in 1 year. That's not going to happen.
Right.
And that's not going to happen. So,
We'll try to build it up over
but
2
you
years.
it's not going to happen in 1 year. There is no way.
Right,
that 15%
but that's why I
happen.
said if we need to do it gradually, we need to have a plan and we need to stick to it, because when we decided to go self-insured, we took a huge responsibility. We're responsible for making sure that we're giving the employees the health care benefits that they were promised, and we're not going to run the Board of Ed budget into the ground while we're doing it. So we need to be much more on top of this.
Yep. No, there's the projections and the information we use. I'll take 3 years of data we take a look at, historical. And the reason I do that is to try to smooth things out as much as possible versus the fluctuation you see year over year. So we look at quite a bit of data. There's components that are part of the projection I build that could build some conservatism into there. And we plan to do that, especially when we do the budget process this year. So Christian and I will be working pretty closely in the near future to kind of get those numbers prepared for when that cycle really gets into high gear for you guys. I know it's a busy time of year.
Todd's coming over next week, is it?
I'll be over next week.
We'll be meeting with the town to go over all of our projection, the budget setting again for 18-19, and we'll take into consideration what happened this past year and how we can improve and get more accurate numbers.
Okay, we have two questions
Okay.
over here, Mark and then
Okay.
Tracy.
So I guess the elephant in the room is, what happened to the $4 million? Why didn't we put that money in? Did we use it for books, teachers, overtime? Why did we put the money in over the last 4 years?
Well, let's put it this way, that we had to keep up with our contractual obligations, number one, which tend to run between 2 and 3% per annum, compounded. Then on top of that, we had been unable to fully fund our transportation costs to the tune of about $500,000 every year, as well as our special education costs have increased dramatically, especially with the addition of the Camino Alto program. We added first 2 classrooms, then 4 classrooms. That spending had to be covered, so it came at the expense of money earmarked to go into the benefit fund. So in order to pay for all the contractual increases, to pay for the transportation, to pay for the special education, with the backdrop that the town at some points budgeted nothing, 0, sometimes 1.2 or 1.3%. Sometimes it gives us 2%. One time it gave it 3%. In my 4 or 5 years, it's given us 3%. So on average, the increase to our budget is less than our inflation and expenses, and that's come at the expense of funding this reserve. So yes, the reserve has dwindled down, but if we want to get back up again, we have to put more money into the benefits line, obviously. But then that comes at the expense of what again? Contractual salary increases, right? It comes to facing the fact that we may have to look at how many people we have, and that's 85% of our expenses are employee expenses.
Oh, I understand fully. So essentially, you protected the board from making hard cuts in personnel by sliding money from benefits that we weren't aware of to cover those shortfalls.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And here's the thing is we don't see the budget transfers because like Dr. Sewell and I were just saying in the Budget and Audit Committee, we don't see anything that comes out of grant funds. So we aren't seeing full fund budget transfers, which is what we've begun to ask for.
We never saw a transfer from the benefits fund to transportation or special ed.
And when we did, we immediately questioned it because that transfer, that's the impetus for this
It
discussion.
is sort of a year-end transfer.
Yeah, well, Chris, the bottom line is, it's your responsibility to be clear with the board throughout the year when these issues come up. And, you know, if we were not self-insured and we didn't have this fund to deal with, we would have to make the decisions about how to cover costs and spend money and raise money. And I am just saying publicly that it would be advisable to make sure you're clear with the board what decision points you are at during the year, because I'm sure people around this table would have opinions about that. And also, it's not very reassuring to know to have money moved around like that without us knowing. It's not reassuring to the public, and it's not reassuring to the board. Tracy?
What I think that we may need to consider for Ms. Ide's committee, the policy committee, is that the board makes a policy that.
Ilda Ray's
Yes,
committee?
Ms. Ray, isn't that what I said?
You said I.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Ray.
I was like, what committee?
I'm looking Ilda and Ide. I'm sorry, Ms. Ray's committee, the policy committee, that the board does not authorize the fund balance to go below 15% without express notification and approval and moving of that money. So that way, I mean, our job is to oversee budget, policy, and the superintendent. Somehow, Chris moved the money. He made that decision to move the money. I don't know where it came from. This came to our attention because there was a budget transferred for books, and $156,000 was transferred out of benefits. And then we find out that it's already underfunded. And that's on us because this is, Dr. Sewell said in the committee meeting, municipalities go under because they underfund things like this, pensions, benefits, that kind of stuff. So I think maybe we need to get a policy that says, create one, borrow one, get the attorneys to put one together that says, the board expects that the fund balance maintains a minimum of 15%, that the money is not to be transferred by anyone but the board without the express approval of the Board of Education.
That's a very
So that way
that's
that
a
money
good
doesn't
suggestion.
become money that can be moved at someone's will.
Part of the problem here is that this is not just a board account. This is a town account.
Right, we're talking about the board portion of this account, though.
So, well, it's not really set aside or managed as a board. In other words, we don't have a separate pool of money for the board and a separate pool of money for the town. You can look at the total total claims expenditures and say how many of those claims were filed on behalf of town employees versus board employees. But the fact of the matter is, this is a town account that includes board and town employees. The board, the employees of the board are a large enough group that this kind of an insurance plan could work for the board alone. It could not work for the town alone. So we put it together as a total town plan in order to be able to make it whatever savings that it achieves over, the standard fully funded insurance that you talked about at the beginning.
Yep.
We wanted everybody to be able to benefit from whatever benefits we could obtain. So yes, the board could say we want to constrain how low you can bring the balance down, but I really think that it's a town decision, not just a board decision.
Well,
but we don't
okay, but
want-
we don't need to debate
And
that
the concern
policy here.
is that if it gets down to 5%, the likelihood that you exceed 5% a couple of years in a row is significant enough that it could happen. And so what happens if you got your reserve at 5% and you go over 5% 2 years in a row? Now where's the money coming from?
Well, and I think that makes it more imperative that we don't bring down the town self-insurance as well by underfunding our portion of it. So
So-
right off the top, we have to pay for
Well,
transportation, we have to pay for salaries, we have to pay for benefits. End of
I don't know that
discussion.
it's,
money
that
doesn't
it's,
come into
that
play.
we've underfunded, what he's saying is that the balance in the
Has
in the
gone
benefit
below.
fund is 5% and it's $12 million is for us and the town. Okay, so it's 5% of that is about $6 million, or no, $600,000. Okay, over the last 6 years, we're ahead by $600,000, but you could easily go below so how much have we gone up and down over the last 4 years?
He can't really tell you that. I can tell you that.
Well, we've got estimates for each of the 4 years, and we've got
Yeah, but
claims
he doesn't
totals
know
for each.
about the fund balance. The fund balance
Right.
is a common.
No, I'm not talking about the fund balance. I'm talking about the size of the expenditures. If the size of the expenditures has exceeded the estimates by more than $600,000 twice, we know what's happening.
Right, but to Chris's point, there's more components that make up the fund balance other than the piece we're talking about, which is the bulk of it. It's run overall pretty well. I mean, it is a positive standpoint from a claim standpoint, and I think, like you said, Dr. Sewell, there's years where it's run a little negative. We have some years where you kind of take a look at like, oh my God, what's going to happen here, and you'll see claims spike, and then usually we'll account for it in the projection for the next year. We budget it, and then we like to think things stabilize, and usually that's happened, where we'll have a bad year, and then we'll have a couple of good years where we're supposed to see that fund balance build up again.
So for the purpose of everyone actually seeing what's going on, that should be a simple graphic. How much you estimated in each year, how much the total claims were in each year. I realize that's not a perfect picture of everything that's going on.
Yep.
But it does say what was the estimated amount and what was the actual expenditure outlay.
Yep. No, you're right.
Some years it's going to be above the line and some years it's going to be below the line, but if you look at the graphic, you can see it going up and down, and people can kind of understand what that fluctuation looks like.
Okay, and I could certainly provide something like that. Would that be helpful to the board? If I can,
Yes.
I don't have it with me tonight, but I can
Yeah,
put something together for
I
you.
think it would be helpful for everybody because sometimes a picture is really worth 1,000 words.
Okay.
Right.
And I may keep it simple. I may, with regards to, again, there's more components that go into the overall balance, but I'm certainly happy to share from a claim perspective on the medical and prescription side, what that looks like over the last 4 or 5 years. Is that enough information?
That would be helpful to get a
Okay.
graphic like that.
Okay, I can do that.
There were more questions that we had put forward. I know the board has more to discuss about how we'd like to deal with this moving forward. Like some very good suggestions have been put on the table, including setting a policy. But I want to give you a chance. I don't think you should have to sit here through all of our discussions. So I want to give you a chance to finish answering the questions that we sent you.
Okay, and there were a couple that were touched upon, but I guess I'll go down to the next one I have here, which is administrative costs and fees. Over the last year, it was just over $1.5 million for the medical and dental expenses. So that incorporates administrative fees, stop-loss premiums, and for the bulk of it, there's they have some other components. I don't want to go into too much detail because it gets into the weeds a little bit, but it was essentially $1.5 million for the 2017 and 18 policy period.
For vision and dental, you said?
For medical,
For medical and
prescription, and dental.
For 1 year or for?
1 year. For 1 year, yeah. Correct.
okay.
All right.
Any questions on that? Okay.
The next one I see on the list, and this is one we've touched upon, recommendations on reserves, and there's been some back and forth in the room talking about that. I work with a bunch of different municipalities, so there's a slight variation between what some will do and others do and how they track things. But from my perspective, I'm a conservative person, so I tend to lean towards the 20 to 25% as the target number. I've seen groups that have gone 10, 15, and that's worked for some of them. But for me, being conservative, I like to see the number around 20, 25. Again, that's me. And folks sometimes agree with me and sometimes don't, but that's kind of my philosophy. And I like to see things be in a nice, safe position. So when you have a crazy bad year, you're not, looking into the coffers trying to find money. So that's kind of where my position is on the recommendations for reserves.
Any comments, questions on that? Okay.
Okay. The last one I had, the last one I got was an interesting one. I got this one the other day. I'm going to read it to you. I don't know if you guys have this in front of you. What is the estimated standard deviation of the forecasting error for healthcare claims as a percentage of expected claims? And the answer, there's two ways to answer that. One is it may depend on the size of the group you're talking about. So
We can't guess who asked you that.
Murphy's not quite
he's I can see the smile on his face.
Sounds like statistics to
It is a statistical, actuarial, statistical, all kinds of the answer to that will sometimes vary depending on the size of the group you're talking about. So with a smaller population, you'll see a larger variation. With a larger group, when you get to like groups with 10,000, 20,000 employees, it's much easier to predict that because it's a larger group, law of large numbers. So we do see some fluctuation here. Like I said, with the projections I've done that I did recently was I saw about an average about a 4.5% deviation over about a 4-year period, which is pretty good for a group your size, just about 700 employees that are covered on the plan.
My guess was, based on when we started this several years ago, 5 years ago?
Longer now. It's probably been about, I think 9, is it probably?
No, it hasn't been 9. Dr. Adamowski was
Before
here.
I got here, it was like 2012, I'm thinking.
Maybe. Anyway, when we first started this, it seemed like it was around 5. But at the time, the stop loss corridor was given as 15%, and tonight you said 20, which
He's conservative.
no, that's a
For the town of
contract.
Avon,
That's a
we can
contract
use that.
amount. That
I could double check it.
Stop loss policy is contracted at some number.
If I confused it, I may have confused the 15 and 20. It's I could double check on that, but I know most of the ones I have are 20. There's a possibility you're at 15 for your aggregate.
In terms of how much your target is for where you're trying to set it, it does make a difference of how big a risk corridor you're trying to cover.
Correct,
So
and it
if
drives.
it's 15, it's different than if it's 20. But if the standard deviation is about 5%, that means that roughly 2/3 of the time you should be within 5% of your forecast estimate. And you all are experienced enough at making forecast estimates that I expect that probably happens, even
Yes.
for groups our size.
Yep. Yeah, I mean,
Which means that a 10% error is only likely to happen something like once in every 6 years that you could get up in the 10% range. And then one of the reasons that the risk corridor is at 15% is that that's sort of around roughly 1 in 100. So
Yep.
you're talking way over some of our heads
well,
here.
the idea is that if I'm selling insurance, I would just as soon collect a premium on a policy I do not have to pay off on
Right,
Yeah.
terribly often.
right.
Correct.
So, but,
Right.
So it still is reasonable, but we have to, if we want to make sure that we're not going to get caught with a bill that we can't pay, we need to say how much money do we have to cover it, and how likely are we to have to particularly how likely are we to have to cover it more than 1 year in a row.
right, and that shouldn't be the case. It's
yeah.
abnormal for that to
Pretty
happen, because usually when we do the projection for the next year, you're going to kind of account for what just happened in the past year, and for it to exponentially get that much greater,
Yes.
very, very
I understand that gets figured in, but
Yep. But you're right, probability is low to get 2 years in a row like that. Correct.
So back to the straightforward answer to that question, what is your answer on that question, despite the back and forth here?
Oh, well, I did some,
4.5%.
4.5%?
yeah, based on some information I put together, about 4.5%. Yep. Which is close to the 5 that you were
That's
referring to.
about what I've,
Yep.
Okay.
Very close to your number.
Good. that helps.
Mark?
Well, I certainly appreciate Dr. Siebel's analysis of the, but we had that covered. 4 million went to cover other expenses. So if we didn't cover the other expenses with that 4 million, your fund would be there. We covered the 5% deviation. We had that covered. That's not the issue. To me, we have two separate issues here. We have the townwide, as Dr. Siebel's mentioned, we have a townwide program, which I recall, I was on the council and you were the chairman of the Board of Finance. We, at the time we set this up, requested some type of annual meeting of the minds, whether it was our paid staff or few members of the board. So apparently that hasn't happened. But that's one issue. The other issue is the Board of Ed's use of the funds for other purposes.
Right.
So we've
Yes.
covered your statistical analysis. Now we have to figure out how to get the Board of Ed
Right.
funds back in line. And then we have to also work with our other two boards to make sure
Right.
the fund stays balanced. But they're two separate issues.
I agree with your analysis, and I just want to, ask if there are any more questions for Mr. Goodall before we let him leave, and then we can continue to discuss
I
this.
have some questions, Todd.
Oh, do ya?
How can we help reduce the expenses in the health insurance fund? You
Okay.
came up with some good ideas. What are other municipalities doing to reduce the pressure on their claims?
That don't include more high deductible options.
I can tell you love those plans, don't you? Actually, no. We had a utilization review meeting with Anthem just the other day, ended last week actually, and so there's a couple things that we will do, and there's programs that exist through the carriers, and this specifically, most of those were focused a little bit on pharmacy or prescription drugs, which is really where we're seeing the biggest spike in costs for a lot of the groups, specialty medications, the commercials you see at nighttime, during your TV shows. Those are the ones that are, $1,000, $2,000, $10,000 a script per month. And we're really trying to focus on programs there that we've been able to put in place for other groups. So, those are the type of things we're doing with other groups right now. And there's different variations of that. Some are more severe than others. Some are easier to put in. Some are a little more restrictive. There's some analysis we would do to see the medications being used now by board and town members to minimize disruption. We want to make sure we're not going to tip over the apple cart if we're going to consider doing something like that. But it is things that we're doing in other towns and boards and cities right now.
It is the biggest cost driver right now
It is.
in healthcare.
I mean, years ago, the prescription drug spend used to be about 10% of the cost. Now it's anywhere from, I see 20, 25, 27% of total cost. It's gone up exponentially crazy. It's a problem.
We're one of only 2 countries in the world that allows prescription drugs to be advertised. So it's very consumer driven. People go to their doctors and they say, I want that pill that I saw that ad about on TV. And it is a big cost driver. I agree.
You're right. Absolutely is.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Forgive my ignorance on this one, but I heard something about the higher deductibles, and wouldn't it make more sense to lower the deductibles and then get the preventive taken care of in the end? I mean, is there something that you're seeing where
Wellness program.
that would
Wellness programs like the
Anthem
state
generally-
employee plan,
Yeah,
for example.
Anthem has a wellness program where they cover 100%, don't they? And then our insurance kicks in after that, like mammograms, pap smears. I'm just doing the women
Yeah.
things, prostate exams, colonoscopies. Those are all preventative care when you hit certain thresholds.
There are preventive, all the plans offered have preventive care that are covered 100%, and we don't want folks not going for at least for physicals. At a minimum, we want people to go for the doctor. So I know while high deductibles can sometimes, people get a little scared when they see those big numbers. And I didn't mention anything about changing deductibles as part of the plan, although that's sometimes discussion points as part of negotiations. Preventive is always going to be covered 100%. There's also other ways we can look at programs where, how do we do things with preventive medications? Some folks can't afford those. So there's different programs we can take a peek at. Now, the thing with preventive medication is we got to be careful because sometimes there's a slight increase in cost of those, and it's hard to measure this from an ROI perspective, does it help eliminate a potential major issue from someone if you get those medications on a
Long-term
preventive
health.
standpoint?
Management
Right.
of chronic illness, for example, like in the state employee plan.
Yep.
where all copays are you're exempted from copays for management for any drugs or treatment care that requires management of, say, hypertension, diabetes, other things like that.
Yep.
And the whole idea is you save money in the long run because people don't avoid taking care of themselves.
Right. There's folks that we've talked to.
So,
that,
Mike,
oh,
your
I'm sorry.
question is right on point. Right, you want to encourage people to stay healthy,
Right.
right, without overusing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed. Did that address or answer your question? Okay. All
I
right.
have a question about how often do we audit who's on the plan? You
Like
were-
like dependent eligibility or?
Dependent eligibility.
I've been on for a few years. We have not gone through that process with Windham. That's certainly something we can visit. There's different ways to approach that, depending on the severity or how strong you want to go from an audit perspective. We've been involved where sometimes we provide reports and the work is done on the employer side. We've involved audit firms that do have a cost tag with those. That we've sometimes done that, depending on how intense you want to be from a audit perspective. So there's different ways to approach it. We can talk about different ways to approach that for Windham.
Is that an issue?
Well, I just don't know. If we're paying for people that shouldn't be on the plan, then.
How do you determine that?
How do you
How does
determine
an audit
that?
like that work?
It's a letter that goes out to you and says, are these people not covered by another health coverage?
Yeah, there's different ways you can do that. So one of those ways could potentially be a letter that goes out and we can coordinate with Anthem on this, but there would be some work that sometimes falls on the administration to kind of help manage that process. Is you basically almost go through a full enrollment process where you have people almost go through, instead of having a passive enrollment, you say, okay, everybody's got to go and fill paperwork out this year, and you have to support, if you have a spouse or let's say you have stepsons, you have to support and show paperwork to prove that they're an eligible dependent. So things of that nature.
We do that,
Doesn't
Chris.
HR do that
do that.
internally?
They should be. I mean, again,
Yeah.
but some
We do
groups.
that here.
Yeah.
Okay.
We
Yeah.
do that here. When they fill out the paperwork, they have to prove and say that they have another insurance. So we do it.
Every year?
Yeah. Anytime they fill out the paperwork for the insurance, they have to.
Right, but if I enrolled
If there's a
now-
change,
Right,
yeah.
unless there's a change, I wouldn't re-enroll, would I? No.
No,
I
no.
would stay
Well, so when
enrolled.
they enroll into the program.
Right, so maybe a few years down the line, like they're
You do it.
suggesting now, there's an audit. And I'm not saying that, we kick uninsured people off, but if they're already otherwise insured, or if they've aged out or something like that, maybe.
Or they've gotten a divorce, or
That-
don't have that captured.
That's a perfect example. And sometimes we'll find out where someone has a divorced spouse that stays on the
Change
plan.
in
They never tell
status.
anybody, but that person stays
Change
on
in
the plan.
status.
That's an example
Yeah.
of how that could happen,
Okay,
Yeah.
potentially, yeah.
thank you.
Good.
Yep.
Any other questions for Mr. Goodall? I hope you will work closely with the town and the Board of Ed and try to get us some numbers and get us that graph, the chart that we asked for. And I think we would appreciate an annual update here at the board level. And as Mark talked about, we'll talk about later, about how to get the town and the board on the same page on all of this.
I'd be happy to. Be happy
Okay.
to.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Tad.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
See you next week.
Yep. My pleasure.
So, we can continue discussion if people would like. There were a couple good suggestions that were put on the table. One was adopting a policy at the Board of Ed level about the reserves and decisions around that, and making sure that we have to have some sort of affirmative action taken by the board if we're going to fall below 15% and something like that. Mark also made a really good suggestion and about making sure that we should be asking the superintendent and Chris to get together with the town, and if we have to write something to the town, I think we should, and to make sure that the town and the Board of Ed all get on the same page about this and make sure that we're really clear about where all this stands moving forward.
Can I just say something? And
Sure.
Mrs. Lambert said it before, but there are consequences when you don't fully fund the school budget, and there are hard decisions that need to be made when it's not fully funded. Over the years, when the budget is not fully funded, those hard decisions have to be made. So, not saying that Chris did what was right or wrong, I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is that when we present a budget that is at 3.4 or 3.5 and the excess, well, you need to cut it, then something have to go, tough decision have to be made. Because if the budget is not fully funded every year, then there's a log every year.
Right.
I mean, typically, we come in at our expenses are increasing 4.6, close to 5% per annum. And by the time we get to the year, it's probably 3.2 to 3.4. By then, it gets to the Board of Finance, and it's 3%. All right, now you've already reduced it 1.5 points from where you started at, realistically speaking, funding all of your programs with the contractual increases. Then the town sends that to referendum. 3 referendums later, you're down at 1.27, and you still have to get to the 10 to 15% risk corridor, right?
Right,
Right?
right, yeah. I
So,
understand the difficulties
Some
of
big
it.
things have to give then.
And they don't
Right.
want, people don't want
And,
cuts in
and
the
we,
budget.
we just want to make sure we're part of that discussion.
Right.
That's-
We need to know what has to give, because you're actually hurting the Board of Ed when you shelter us from that $4 million loss, because now we can't communicate to the public that, well, really, you shouldn't have that particular program, but we covered you with this insurance loss, hoping that the big gamble would pay off next year and our reserves would our expenses would go down and we could cover it the following year. But we're kind of like a gambler following our bet, hoping we'll eventually be able to pay it off.
Thank you.
The board needs to have that knowledge. We can't be protected from that, so that we don't know where the money is going, so that we cannot fully communicate to the public, hey, this is the result of shorting us this much money. We're not going to have this preschool
Well,
program.
every year, I provide transfers, year-end transfers, and in there, it shows that the money goes out of benefits. So if you look at that sheet, it's quite clear that the money, the overspending from transportation, the overspending in special education, it comes out of the benefits fund.
Well, I think,
Follow our financial statements, and they're online. You can look at the fund, and you can see the fund balance there as well. And sometimes what happens is, you don't know what that fund balance is until December of the year that's passed, because you're just picking up all the claims, putting together all of the withholdings from the people's paychecks, putting together all of the transfers. So the full picture doesn't come into view sometimes until December or January or February. Then you're in a reactive mode, sort of. What I've talked about in the meeting beforehand is that we're going to have a 4-point plan to recapitalize the budget, the fund balances. We're going to go and we've increased the premiums to the employees. We've increased the employer contribution through the budget process. We're going to look to get additional money into, we got the Puerto Rico money into the fund because the state gave us
469.
469, so we were able to transfer that into the fund to help bolster it. We're also going to work with the town to increase a certain construction project where the savings to the board's general fund are going to be used to fund the gap in the fund balance for the health benefits. And then finally, I'm going to work with the town to provide more from their end. I'll work with Nate and the Rosados, so we'll clear. We have some hopefully surplus funds from the town's perspective, which I think they'll, to recapitalize, we can use some of that. So all those 5 points should get us back to at least 10 to 15%.
well, I think what we need is something in writing that explains all that. Okay, a verbal report is, but a written report that the superintendent will make sure we get that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine.
If the total claims, the estimate for claims is 12 million, the contribution to the reserve fund should be 1.2 million. If there's 5% already, if there's 600,000 already there, we should still try and add another 1.2 million. I'm not sure how much what you just said totals up to. It totals up to certainly more than 600,000.
Yeah, again, how successful I'm going to be, because first of all, I'd have to get a couple pieces of legislation passed, both at the town council level. But one of that pieces of legislation is the finalization of our move, because my finance department is still stuck over there. and we're trying to get out of
Yeah.
that building. But to get out of that building and to finish the shed, we need about another $500,000.
But the target for this fiscal year for the contribution to the benefit fund should be $1.2 million.
Yes, well, I'm trying to,
Right, but
Trying to get us there.
just, it should not be how successful you are. It should be how successful we are, and we need to be part of that process. That's all. Yeah, it's, you're not in this alone.
it's
Yeah?
stuff
Yeah.
that I can only put forward with your permission, so.
What's this shed?
So that's a side conversation. We don't need to go into that right now.
Parking garage.
Did anybody else have any comments, questions on this point?
But, and I
Mark,
certainly
go
don't want
ahead.
to continue to ride this horse, but my point being, you use the funds from the state for the Puerto Rican program or just for the fund balance. So
Not directly.
you said you used portion of it to build up some of the fund
What
balance.
happens is they allowed us, they reimbursed us for teachers,
Right.
so I got a listing of all
Yep.
the kids. I think there was about 50 or 60 children from Puerto Rico.
Right.
More
What
than
schools
that.
were they
More
in?
than that.
Right.
What teachers did they have? And then we credited the money against those expenses because they said we had to credit it against the
Well,
previous year's expenses. So that money, those savings, I put it back into the health fund.
Right.
They gave us
No,
money for
okay.
expenses that we'd already
Yeah.
paid.
Here's what I think.
So the money that we had for those expenses got, as Murphy just said, got paid by something else, and we didn't. It's just what I'm talking about. It's a sort of a shell game that we play that we weren't aware of, and it's.
Right.
I guess
and
I made the point enough.
I
That's-
think we're all
that's it.
speaking
Yeah.
with one voice. I don't think we need to keep going over
Right.
it. But Tracy, did you have
I
something
think
you
that's why we
want?
need the policy. The benefits are an obligation as much as special ed and transportation and stuff like that. And I really think they need to be protected. And I think that makes it uncomfortable for Dr. Garcia, but she still has to have that conversation with us instead of robbing the benefits and saying, well, we kept all but uncertified librarians or something like that. We now have to cut 6 teachers, and that's the reality of what the public needs to hear as well. We have this obligation to these people that are working for us that if they get sick, part of their benefits it's there. They're paying
Right.
into it.
Right.
It needs to be there. We can't say in May one year, sorry, we're out of money, you can't get sick for the rest of the year.
Right.
It doesn't feasibly work that way. So we, as a board, have to make sure that money is protected from being rated, and I think that's why the policy is so important right now.
Agreed. Mary?
Yeah, I just want to make an observation that, years ago when the finance was united, the town and the Board of Ed, and Munis was put into place, there were several efforts along those lines. And I feel that there's a gross injustice in separating the Board of Ed budget, in the vote, when in fact you really cannot separate it because of things like the fact that we allow the town employees. I think it's a smart economic decision, but to be on an insurance fund that is mostly Board of Ed, but it allows people to have these benefits. So I just want to make this observation that this town shouldn't be bifurcating the budgets, and it shouldn't be leaving the Board of Ed budget in this vulnerable position, when in fact it's absolutely part of the entire town and the health of the town. Good observation.
Charter issues. Yes.
But people are willfully ignorant,
right,
about
yes.
what's
Absolutely. I just, I want to say that I think that this is something that we need to, clearly, we put this on the agenda for a workshop because we need to get more on top of this. I don't think anybody around this table disagrees with that. And it did come up when we were talking about the contracts, was it last year or earlier this year? With with some of the employees, not the ones that are about to come up for negotiation, about whether or not we should really be looking at other options so that we are making an informed decision about really what our options are. And one idea that I want us to think about doing is asking one more time for a quote on what the cost would be for us to, as some other municipalities and boards of eds have decided to do, is to buy into the state employee health plan. I think we should get a quote. That's my opinion. I don't know whether other people agree with that, but I think we owe it to the taxpayers and to the teachers and the staff to have that information again.
I already asked for it.
What?
I already asked for that quote.
You already did, okay, great.
No, I absolutely
So when we
agree.
go to decision-making, I mean, we're talking about retention issues in this district too. And, you know, if we continue to pass off costs to them, that's essentially a pay cut, you know, if in some way, shape, or form for a family that has to make tough decisions about healthcare coverage for their children and for their loved ones. Anybody else?
I agree with, we went to this program in the first place because it was more economical than what we were doing previously. But that doesn't mean that it is the most economical option that we have today. So it's certainly worth taking a look at another option.
I think Todd looked at it a few years back, but we can look at it again.
Yeah, I think we need,
As
I
long
think
as
we,
Cost it out.
well, actually, the comptroller's office provides those quotes, so not somebody who's getting paid money to
Sell us insurance.
to sell us insurance, yes.
They're going to tell you that selling us insurance, somebody else selling us insurance is a bad idea because
Right.
then they're going to lose the business.
Right.
That's the reality of it. So, Dr. Garcia, you've contacted the comptroller's office? or-
No, I asked for another third party to give us.
Okay, fine, that's fine. That's
We
good.
just have to make sure that we are in step with the town, because we can't act independent of the town employees.
No, we can't.
So
And we
it's a good
can't-
idea to get a control,
Right.
but we need to have the Board of Selectmen
And we
through
can't
Chris's
act, we
office
can't
to
act
move.
without the unions agreeing.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it
a
has to-
long,
It's a disruption if
it's
you
a
change
long-
carriers.
right, but if they're unhappy with the plan, they might be happy for the disruption, so.
Thinking a very expensive plan for the employees. I think so.
So thank you, everybody. As you can tell, I have some opinions about this. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. So the next item on the agenda is the 2018, no, it should be the 2019.
19, sorry, we went to 20, yeah.
2019-2020 budget calendar, the,
18, 19. I
It's
think.
18, 19.
It's this,
Right.
No, it's 1920.
19, it's
Oh,
19,
19,
yes,
20.
1920. It's next
1920.
Did you
year.
have copies for everybody who didn't?
yes. Yeah, we had a discussion about this, and we wanted to just present it to the board tonight, so everybody gets a chance to look this over, and
I'm good.
we can certainly make adjustments if need be, but
I have it.
there've been a bunch of us who have weighed in on this.
It's still in draft form, so.
Well, if we approve it tonight, it won't be in draft form.
Right, right. Do people want to take a minute to look at this? I'll give you a minute or so, and then we can ask questions, or if anybody wants to raise up some highlights about this process. Because we did propose changing some things up.
Something that I asked for in the budget and finance, or budget and audit, or whatever we call the committee, before this one, was that sometime before, hopefully the end of the year, the Board of Ed can get a final numbers for last school year, last fiscal year,
Okay.
of what we spent in each category, just like it's laid out in the budget book that we get. This is what we spent in 17, 18,
18.
right.
Audited,
Audited, right. So that way we know that we spent $4 million in legal and $1 million on paper and $8 million on transportation. I'm just throwing numbers out there. They don't mean anything. But, okay, well, we spent 10% less or 10% more this year, which Chris can give us, approximates and stuff like that. And I understand the end of the year, when we have the money, we have to, finish everything out and stuff like that. But give us approximates maybe where we are for the 6-month mark for this year or something. So when we're looking at Dr. Garcia's budget book, we can say, before we approve it and adopt it as our budget, it changes from when we adopt it as our budget to when the Board of Finance then cuts it before they send it out to referendum.
Right.
To when it then fails referendum and it gets cut some more. And we rarely see a full funds budget. We do transfers only of local funds, which we're hoping to change in the future.
That's,
In the Finance and Audit Committee, we see, and the board approves only local funds transfers. There are a lot more funds out there that we don't ever see the transfers for. The books that we had discussed before are coming from Title I. Okay, well, what else was spent in Title I? And we can carry some over. How much can we carry over? How much is carried over from year to year? We can't make really informed decisions until we have all of this information. And that's not fair to the taxpayer or the benefits fund that's getting shortchanged or something like that, so.
So if I understood you correctly, you'd ask by the end of this calendar year to get the year-end numbers for the end of the last fiscal year, which ended on June 30th.
Right.
As well as the best estimate about where we are year-to-date as of the end of this calendar
Right.
year. So before we go into the budget process. Okay. Okay.
Please.
Yes.
I don't mean to make more work for
No.
you guys, but I don't want to get it in the middle of February or March and then say, well, we did this last year and now we're ready to approve it. And then we get into that uncomfortable place where we approve something that isn't necessarily what Dr. Garcia thinks she can work, or, you know, that's more or less than what it should be. And then we shortchange ourselves on transportation or benefits or salaries or something like that. Thank you.
Okay. So people, have you had a chance to look at this schedule? Especially for the brand-new board members, not the board members who have been here before, who understand what going through a budget is like. Does anybody have any questions? Or are there any glaring problems with this?
Maybe I can take people through sort of an
Well,
overview.
but
for
I-
that-
Yeah.
for new members.
If you
But
want,
maybe you want me to do it? You can start on it. Well, you can start and I can tell you what we do with the schools. I can start with the schools.
So what we provide them is a listing of all of their employees, the positions, and then.
you mean
that's
the
certified and
the principals?
The
Yeah.
principals, exactly. Each location, each school, the 4 elementary schools, Charles Barrows, the middle school and the high school, as well as the Early Learning Center. They all get a template that has all of their positions with the people that are currently filling those positions. They go and verify that those are positions that they actually have, because people tend to move around, you know, and we want them to true it up to us, to tell us what they've got in each location. Sometimes they split people across locations as well. And then they come back to us, we then cost them out. How much does the employee cost, all the salaries? And then they also fill out the operating expenses for each location. So we have a by-location budget filled out by the time it's like around December. So it has the fully costed out location budget, which we compare to their, like a tuition based times their pupil. So it could be like $10,000 for an elementary school student, it could be $11,000 for a middle school student, it could be $12,500 for a high school student. And the reason that they increase like that is because there's more expensive programs at the high school level than at the elementary school level. They also have sports and co-curricular activities, so we do that. Another piece that we factor into the elementary school budgets is additional programs. So they might have programs that relate to all autism, you know, medically fragile, and other special programs, and they get money put aside called off the top that they fund on top of their per pupil. So if a program costs $500,000, we'll fund that $500,000 off the top. That stuff comes back to us. Dr. Garcia and then I sit with each location, and we review their people, and they give us staffing requests.
So the principal come with their budget and what the principal, each department, what we need to do, what I do is that they come with their needs. They have to justify their budget and their needs. You know, if we're looking at equity and we're going to give the schools what they need to get what each kid need, what the principals they come with their mission, their vision, and their needs and their program. Some program are district-wide programs. Some program are school-based program that naturally need a program that is different, like they have pathways that are different than another program. But the purpose of the budget is for principals to come, or any department, to present their argument for what they need, why they need a certain amount of staffing, certain amount of supplies, etc. That's a very important process in the budget. So it's not only looking at the numbers and costing out. Yeah, if we do cost out, what it will cost us. And if you want 10 teachers and you only can give you 8, but there is a process of discussion of what we want. The same thing, they have to meet with their SGC and work with the SGC. And no, we learned our lesson, Dr. Galushi. We learned our lesson. They have to submit it to us by a deadline sign. And you know, the law requires that the SGC is involved in the budget process and that the principal present the budget. Not that the SGC has to approve it, but they are involved in the process. So, and hear the suggestion from the HGC. And so that discussion take place. We look at, okay, did you use this amount of money last year? Didn't use this amount of money this year? How much you spent last year in service versus what you want to spend this year? And look at, those are all important things in the budget. So there's a technical part of the budget, but I will say there's also an adaptive part of the budget of looking at what school really need. And so we noticed some school, for example, NACHAC, usually have a higher need than some other schools. Maybe this year, Sweeney will hire another need because there's a program now at Sweeney, the number of autism students have increased in Sweeney. But usually NASHAC was one of the highest need schools in the district.
So could you explain to folks the difference between a budget workshop and a budget forum?
Yeah.
Because I think it's really important that people get the right dates on their calendars now, right? So they don't say in February, oh, I had no idea that that was going to happen at that meeting.
So a budget forum is where we go out and hear suggestions from the community about what is working, what they would like to see in the parking lot, what they would like to see. Basically, it's what would you like to see your child in Windham Public School attain in school. So and the parents are very informed of the different programs and the different resources that we're using. So that's the purpose of the forum, to really hear from the community, from the parents, what is going well in the school that they like to see remain, and what is something that could be in the parking lot. The budget workshop now is totally different. The budget workshop is where we're working with numbers, where we're presenting scenarios to you, to the board.
You're working with
Yes,
the
yeah,
group.
yeah, we're presenting scenarios to you. So we need 100 teachers. This is what it's going to cost. We need to cut 5 psychologists. This is what's going to happen. So it's where we're working with numbers. We're giving you the different scenarios, and that's for a workshop with the board.
So those are really important for
Right,
board members to be at.
Now, I will, Madam Chair, if I may, make a word of caution, that last year we had 9 scenarios, and 9 scenarios make it really difficult, and we run in crunching time to present the budget, so we may want to think about, instead of having 9 scenarios, maybe 6. I'm not putting a number there, but just to be very aware
Right.
that if we have 9 or 10 scenarios to give us, we don't have, put us in a crunching time.
With the number, with them, why couldn't we, as a board, get together, put them together and, narrow them down beforehand to, I mean, I'm
It's up to
sure,
the board.
We could.
I mean, I'm sure that there can be some blending there and you come up with 2 or 3. Yeah.
Well, we started off with 6, remember, and then we added 3 more.
Yeah.
Just try to keep track
In
of all the changes
discussion.
between those.
Mark had his question.
Yeah,
And
my
then-
concern was with the SGCs. I'd like to see a line item up here, or date up here earlier, where we're asking the principals to meet with the SGC, because if we wait till February 11th, all they're doing is rubber stamping or just looking over what's been decided. I don't see a line in here, a timeline in here, when they're actually working with their principals to give input, which I think is the purpose of one of the main purposes of the SGC.
Yeah,
So I'd like to see a line item in there for
I
that.
could put it, but I instruct them to do that by certain deadline.
Yeah, we instruct all of these by the
Sure.
certain deadline, but I would like to see that deadline
You'd
put in
like to
there.
see that
Not a
deadline
problem.
in there.
Yes.
I could put
Okay,
it in there.
So we want to add in
Just some principals meet with the SGCs by
deadline
November,
for
whatever.
SGC.
So they could meet from January 9th to say January 25th.
That's up to you, Dr. Cussie. It's
Yeah.
when they
Put
can
it in
have
there.
some, I'm looking for a timeline when they can have some meaningful input into the budget. and
Sure. Okay.
Not just a review of it.
So I would put it starting in January 9th to January
Well, wait a
25th.
minute. If they're, to follow Mark's point, that would make sense if they did it before
January 9th.
November 26th. That's because.
Correct.
But at that point, the principals are going to be meeting with you to say, this is basically what we want to do here.
No, not yet. This is what they're reviewing currently what they have in their staffing. They're reviewing currently what they have in their staffing.
It says, review school budgets and staffing plans. At what point are the principals actually coming to you with, this is what we're going to ask you, or ask the board to support for the next year? Before they get the SGC should have some opportunity before that to participate in defining what that might look like.
Okay, so here where we said superintendent, work with central office budget with department and staff, that is also principals there. It's not only central office, that also principal, they
What
come
date
back.
are you looking at there?
January 14th to the 25th.
Okay.
So they come back to me in January, so we need to put, that's principal also,
Central office budgets.
and principals, and schools.
So sometime between December 7th and January 25th, they should have met with their SGCs and talked
SGC.
about what their
Right.
staffing is.
So we do have one date that they have here with the SGC, February 11th. Well,
Right.
they could meet with them before that. And I think February 11th is because they go back and tell the SGC, you know, what was, they go
Yeah.
back and report back to the SGC
Right.
what was they able
Right.
to obtain or
But they
not.
should get some input from the SGC before they just go back and report.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
And
So-
then they go back to the SGCs and
it's-
explain to them what happened to
What-
their
what-
request.
What
So
happened to
it's
their,
really-
to the
It's really, as
yes.
Tracy said, between December 7th and January, I would say January 14th, so before they come back to those meetings, sometime in that time period. And you and the
January,
principals can figure out how to make
Yeah.
that happen. Any other suggestions, observations, questions?
I would like to point out to
And
people
then-
that went through it last year that we are planning to vote on the budget on February 27th.
Mhm.
The superintendent will present it to the board, and the board will schedule a vote on it. The reason for that is to avoid getting into a snow day situation like
Like
we
last
got
year.
into last year. So the superintendent has a budget forum with the public on March 4th. On March 13th, we'll have a Board of Ed meeting. We could modify the budget we voted on until 20, you know, if we don't have snow,
Right.
then we would have an opportunity to make an adjustment in the budget if we wish to on March 13th and get it to the Board of Finance by the March 15th deadline.
Does that make sense to folks?
But we will get a vote on the 27th, so then if it snows, we've done it.
Right,
Yes.
we're not running
Rushing,
into,
yes.
Mercy of the weather.
well, yeah, or lack of quorum or something like that, which is what happened last time. It wasn't just the weather. Yeah, yeah. So with the adjustments that were suggested here, are people feeling that we could take action and adopt this budget calendar?
With changes.
Yeah, with those changes that we suggested?
We'd have to add an action item to the agenda, would we not?
Yes.
Yes, so I'd entertain a motion to add
Move that we approve.
action item to 5.1. It would be 5,
I think
Number one.
Action items are.
6.
oh yeah, action item number 3, yeah, okay. Thanks, Tracy.
Janet,
I
you
think
get the
that's supposed to be
changes?
7, and public comment's supposed to be
Well-
8, because there's two,
There's a little confusion in the Roman numerals. there.
Yeah.
yeah, there's two
But I
sixes.
move
Seven.
I move that we add the, approving the 2019, 2020 budget calendar to the agenda.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion?
With adjustments made tonight.
No,
No,
this is
just
adding
to
it
move
to
to
the
the
agenda.
agenda.
Oh, this is just adding it to the agenda under the action items.
Sorry.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
And it's unanimous. Okay, so
Okay,
now.
I'd like to propose that we take up the action
Yes,
items
I was
before the
gonna
executive
ask,
session.
I was gonna ask if somebody
But
would,
one of the action items has to do with executive session.
okay,
I'm not trying to be
No, no,
difficult.
no,
One of
no,
them has to
good
do with
point.
executive session. We can't move on it until we've had the
Well,
executive
we can
session.
separate that
We
one.
can separate them out, yes.
okay, so let's take, so you're proposing that we move items 7, 1, and 3 up on the agenda above item
Yeah.
6. Okay, that motion's been made by Murphy.
second it.
Seconded by Tracy. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay. Okay, so now we'll go to action items, and we will,
Move we approve the C.H. Barrows field trip to the Science Center.
right.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. Okay, and then approval of the 2019-2020
Move that we
budget calendar
approve
as
the-
amended.
Move we approve the 2019-2020 budget calendar as amended this evening.
Second.
Mark,
Go ahead.
Mark have it.
Seconded by Mark. Any discussion? Just make sure you put these dates in your calendar now. All those in favor? Okay, approved. Unanimous. Okay, so now,
I move that we move into executive session for discussion concerning the contract of the Director of Facilities.
motion's
Second.
been made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous.
You're gonna give us like 2 minutes, so?
Yeah, we can have,